Hey guys, and welcome to the channel, History Matters and Matters of History, where I give my thoughts, opinions, and muses of both current and past events. Because events, as history, they do matter, yet they are also matters of history. So let's get right on in it. Today's episode is When Memory Fades, History Repeats. Today I'm going to start off with two biblical verses. Exodus chapter 1, verses 8 and verse 9. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, who knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Now these two verses imply several things. Verse 8 suggests that after Joseph's death, a new ruler arose who shifted Egyptian policy regarding the Israelites. Some Jewish sources estimate that this occurred about 64 years after Joseph's death, indicating that the Egyptian generation that personally knew Joseph had died. The new leadership either did not know of Joseph or, at the very least, had forgotten his legacy. Verse 9, however, implies a certain jealousy among the Egyptians towards the Hebrews. Now, in the Midrash, a rabbinical commentary that provides interpretation, it suggests that the Hebrews were not militarily mightier, but had prospered under Joseph's policies. They had begun to return to their original standard of living prior to the famine and their entry into Egypt. And as a result, they began closing the economic gap between themselves and the Egyptians, which made the latter uncomfortable, since they never viewed the Hebrews as equal. This sentiment is reflected in Genesis chapter 43, verse 32. There are lessons and perhaps even prophetic parallels to be drawn from these two passages. One key theme is that a generation arose that was unaware of its past or chose to ignore it. Whether due to youth, indifference, or political motivations, this historical amnesia led to oppression and injustice, ultimately setting the stage for the Israelites' enslavement. Now, if you ask Google, ChatGPT, or Gemini about the median age of the US population, they will tell you it is about 39 years. This means that half the people in this country are younger than 39. But what that also means is that when this population entered the first grade, the world was already different from the one they were born into, geographically, politically, and culturally. The world in which they were raised and educated effectively disconnected them from the past that shaped their present. Let's take geography, for example. In 1985, there was the Imperial Soviet Union, the USSR, with all its Soviet republics. By 1991, it was gone. The republics had become independent nations, the world map had changed, and for today's 39-year-olds, this was their first grade reality. The Soviet General Secretaries no longer existed. There was only Russia and its presidents. And for much of this generation, there is only one Russian leader they truly know, Vladimir Putin. They are too young to have known Boris Yeltsin, too young to have paid attention to Vladimir Putin's first term, and too young to have cared about Dmitry Mendeleev. By the time they reached maturity, Putin had already solidified his second era of leadership. So why is this important? With the onset and escalation of the Ukrainian crisis, half the US population does not realize or chooses to ignore that this conflict is about Soviet aggression and expansion. They do not recognize it because geographically, there is no Soviet Union, even though its ideology persists in its would-be leader, the current Russian president, who was born and raised during the USSR's glory days. More critically, Ukraine, with its independence, neutrality, and landmass, serves as a buffer zone between an Eastern power that desires imperial status and the Western world. Yet, many fail to grasp this reality Some even believe that Ukraine itself instigated the conflict despite being the victim of an unprovoked assault. Well, if you read in Exodus chapter 1 verse 9, Pharaoh told the Egyptian people something that was not necessarily true, and they believed it, leading to a shift in policy. Likewise, a false narrative about Ukraine has taken hold, and portions of the population have embraced it. But let's look even closer to home. The Josephs of the Civil Rights Movement, Medgar Evers, John Lewis, Martin Luther King Jr., and others, have either passed away or are reaching the final stages of their lives. We are now entering an era much like ancient Egypt, where certain segments of the population either do not know or choose to ignore these Josephs. The legacy of civil rights stalwarts who pressured Lyndon B. Johnson to sign legislation improving the quality of life for Black Americans is being systematically eroded. Progress has been slow, but Black communities have made educational, social, and economic strides, narrowing the inequality gap, just as the Hebrews did in Egypt. And it is not only Black Americans who have benefited from these policies. Other marginalized groups have as well. Yet the sentiment, the narrative being presented by Pharaoh and his court, now in the coded language of DEI, is that somehow, in some way, these groups have become mightier than the dominant class. And as in Exodus chapter 1 verse 10, the fear is that they must be dealt with wisely before they rise up and join the enemy. That is the fear. A generation that knows not has arrived. One segment refuses to acknowledge its own past and how its mistreatment of others created the necessity for policies ensuring equality for all. The other segment is disconnected, having never personally known the Josephs of our struggle. And just as Joseph faded into the shadows of history, so too are the civil rights leaders of our time. The dark trajectory of this trend is clear. If history continues to be forgotten or ignored, oppression, injustice, and even enslavement, whether economic, political, or social, can return, just as in the days of ancient Egypt. History matters. Matters of history. My muse for the day, and that's the way it is. Thanks for tuning in. Hit the subscribe button if you like. We'll talk to you later.